Welcome to Grave Whisper, where forgotten tombstones speak, and the dead still whisper their secrets. Tonight, we unearth a story shrouded in shadows and stained in blood, a tale that has echoed through centuries, whispers of madness, cruelty, and something far more sinister. This is not just another haunted mansion or cursed artifact. This is a legacy of evil. A family name soaked in unspeakable horror. A name that history tried to erase. But the darkness remembers. You are about to hear the true horror story of the Ravencroft family, one of the most wicked bloodlines to ever walk this earth. So light a candle, lock your doors, and listen closely, because some nightmares are real. It began with the silence. Not the kind that wraps a village in peace, but a thick, unholy hush that smothered Elder Hollow like a funeral shroud. Elder Hollow was a forgotten village, nestled deep in the heart of pine-choked woods between foggy English moors. The road that once led there had eroded into nothing but cracked cobblestones and creeping vines, as if the land itself wanted to erase its memory. But memories, as the villagers would tell you, if any still lived, could not be buried so easily. Not when they screamed from beneath the soil, and certainly not when they echoed from the chapel on the hill. The returned 31-year-old Elias Granger, a disillusioned historian from London, had heard the rumors. They came in pieces, hushed whispers from university archives, yellowed letters sent by trembling hands, and one journal he'd found inside a sealed chest at a charity auction, its leather binding scorched, its ink smeared like dried blood. The journal belonged to Father Benedict Holloway, the last priest of St. Marcus Chapel. Dated 1872. His final entry simply read, "The bells no longer toll for the dead. The dead toll for the bells." Elias couldn't resist. He had lost everything: his job, his wife, and even his credibility in academic circles. He needed something to reignite his name, his worth. And if uncovering the mystery of Elder Hollow could do it, he was willing to go as far as madness would take him, even if it meant entering a village that hadn't been spoken of in decades. 2. The village of Hollow Eyes. It took Elias 3 days to reach the outskirts of Elder Hollow. The fog thickened unnaturally as he neared, turning noon into dusk. Trees twisted like agonized limbs. The air stank of iron and mildew. He passed broken cottages with collapsed roofs, and windows nailed shut from the inside. Grass didn't grow. Only patches of sickly yellow moss clung to the cracked stone walls. And no animals. No birds. No wind, just silence. And at the top of the hill, like a crown of rot, stood St. Marcus Chapel. Blackened by time, the chapel's spire leaned awkwardly toward the sky like a broken finger pointing to God. A rusted bell hung in its tower, unmoving. As Elias stepped closer, the ground beneath him shifted with a wet crack, as if bones lay just beneath the dirt. 3. The chapel inside. The chapel was even worse. Pews lay in splinters, their wood warped and split. An altar of black stone stood at the center, covered in claw-like scratches. Behind it, a mural had been half burned away, but Elias could still make out the image, a priest with hollow eyes, holding a torch over an open grave. Children knelt around him in prayer. Their mouths were sewn shut. He turned his flashlight onto the far wall. There it was, just as the journal described, a door behind the pulpit, leading to the crypt, scratched into the wood. And no bells. No salvation. 4. The crypt below. Elias descended the narrow stone staircase. The air grew cold and dense, each breath a struggle. The walls wept black moisture, and something about the air made his ears ring. He counted 17 steps. Then his foot hit something soft. A rotting sackcloth robe lay bunched at the bottom. Inside it, a skeletal figure, its face twisted in a frozen scream. In its hand, it clutched a bell with no clapper. At that moment, the air grew impossibly silent. Elias couldn't even hear his own heartbeat. A silence so absolute, it felt like something was listening through it. Then the whisper came. "You heard the toll, didn't you?" The tolling. Elias spun around. No one. He rushed back up the stairs, but the door at the top had vanished. In its place, stone bricks. Fresh, wet mortar. He pounded on the wall. Screamed. No sound. The silence had become alive, and from behind him, down in the crypt, the sound returned, a single bell tolling dong, slow, metallic, dull, but deep, then another dong. Elias turned, and the skeleton was no longer there. Instead, 17 robed figures stood in a circle. Their faces hidden beneath hoods, their hands clasped in prayer, and in the center, a small child, bound with rusted chains, kneeling beneath the mural, and from somewhere in the blackness, a man's voice. Let the bells call back what the earth tried to hide. 6. The voice of Father Holloway. Elias blacked out. He awoke hours later inside the chapel, but it had changed. Now it was whole, restored, lit with candlelight. People filled the pews, silently praying. A priest stood at the altar, his eyes hollow, his face ghost pale. Father Holloway. Except, this was not a vision. Elias stood among them, in flesh, breathing this time. He tried to speak but could not. His lips refused to move. Father Holloway raised his hands and began to speak in Latin. Each word sent a pulse of pain through Elias's skull. The others chanted in response, louder, until the air cracked and moaned. The bell tolled again, though Elias still saw no clapper, and with it, the ground shook. From beneath the floorboards, black hands clawed upward. The dead were coming to church. 7. The curse revealed. Father Holloway had made a pact. When plague swept through Elder Hollow, he begged the heavens for mercy. But heaven did not answer. So he turned to something else, an entity beneath the earth, a god of silence and shadows. The terms were simple: sacrifice 7 children every 7 years. Ring the bell not with sound, but with souls. And in return, Elder Hollow would be spared disease, famine, and time itself. It worked, for a while. But then the children's whispers began to return, echoing beneath the chapel. The entity demanded more. Not just sacrifices, servants. And now Elias was one of them. 8. The final toll. Elias ran. Screamed. No one reacted. He kicked open the chapel doors and fled into the village. But it had changed, too. Now it was alive again, but wrong. Windows watched him. Trees leaned inward. The sky was black, even though it was day, and every step he took brought him back to the chapel. Finally, exhausted, he collapsed before the altar. Father Holloway stood over him, bell in hand. You wanted the truth, historian. Now you are part of it. He dropped the bell onto Elias's chest. It was warm. And then the final toll came, not from the bell, but from inside Elias's skull. 9. The whisper that follows. When hikers discovered Elder Hollow 2 months later, they found only ruins. But deep within the chapel crypt, they recovered a journal. Freshly written. It ended with these words: The bells no longer toll for the dead toll for the bells, and I can still hear them, whispering my name. Signed, Elias Granger. The hollow that came home. Elias Granger was found wandering near the ruins of Elder Hollow 3 days after his disappearance. He had no wounds, no memory, and no voice. Doctors at St. Bartholomew's London Hospital diagnosed him with acute trauma-induced aphasia. He could write, but not speak. He could weep, but not scream, and at night, he scratched words into the wall of his hospital room. The chapel breathes in silence. They transferred him to Blackridge Asylum a month later, but even the doctors there kept their distance, because Elias did not sleep, and he was never alone. 2. The voice within. On his 11th night at Blackridge, Elias sat in the corner, trembling, eyes wide. The whispers had returned. They weren't voices in his head, they were real. Outside. All around, singing, Hollow, hollow, come below, where dead men dream and children go. Then, something answered from inside him. He began to hum. Low. Monotonous. His own voice, though he hadn't spoken in weeks. Nurse Bellamy witnessed it. It wasn't a hum, she wrote. It was a bell. As if his throat had become a chapel tower, and every breath was a tolling. She quit the next day. 3. The letters from the Ashes. Dr. Emmett Claiborne, a veteran psychologist and occult researcher, took special interest in Elias. He began to dig through university archives and unearthed something chilling. Elder Hollow had burned once before. In 1886, the entire village had been sealed and torched by the Church of the Silent Saints, a rogue sect of exorcists who believed the land itself had become a mouth for the underworld. Dr. Claiborne also found something else, a sealed envelope, charred but intact. Inside was a map of the crypt under the chapel, and beneath it, a single phrase. Where the roots touch bone, the hymn begins. Claiborne knew this was no longer a medical mystery. This was something far older. Point 4. The patient in room 23. Elias was moved to room 23, the most secure in Blackridge. Cameras were installed. Lights kept on 24/7. But every morning, something had changed. His bed would be moved an inch closer to the wall. His fingernails would be bloodied and cracked, though he never screamed. And most disturbing, his journal kept writing itself. Point 1 entry read: "The choir is growing. They remember the fire, and they want to sing again. Through me." Another simply said, "Burn it all again." The black tape. Claiborne placed a recorder in Elias's room. 4 hours, nothing. Then at 3:17 a.m., the tape captured something. First, the sound of breathing, not Elias's. Then, footsteps. Then, a child's voice, whispering in Latin. The voice repeated the same sentence over and over. "Pax domum cadaverum." Peace to the house of the dead. And finally Elias's voice, clear, but inhumanly low. "They are beneath. The bell will toll again. I will open the altar." 6. Returned to Elder Hollow. Claiborne made a terrifying decision, to bring Elias back to Elder Hollow. He believed that only by confronting the root of this haunting could Elias be freed. Accompanied by 2 priests, 1 cameraman, and a reluctant caretaker, they entered Elder Hollow at dawn. But something was wrong. The village was no longer ruined. The cottages stood tall. Smoke drifted from unseen chimneys. Children's laughter echoed in the trees, though none were seen, and the chapel, restored. Perfect. Waiting. Elias walked toward it barefoot, and the doors opened, on their own. Point 7. The choir below inside the chapel. Elias led them behind the pulpit. The crypt door had returned. They descended 17 steps, then 20 more, and at the bottom, a chamber, circular, carved from black stone. In the center, an organ made of bones. Elias stood before it and placed his hands on the keys. No one had told him what to do, but he played. Each note summoned a whisper. Each whisper summoned a voice. And the voices began to sing. A choir of dead children, humming beneath the ground. "We are the choir of hollow eyes. We remember the hymns. We remember the fire. We forgive nothing." The others tried to flee, but the door was gone again. Point 8. The possession. Elias fell to his knees. His mouth opened, but did not speak. Instead, a bell tolled from within his chest. Claiborne screamed, "We must stop him! He's the new bell-keeper!" 1 priest began reciting rites, but the floor split open beneath him. Hands, small, burnt, skeletal, dragged him under. The cameraman ran. He reached the top of the stairs, only to find a mirror instead of a door. In the mirror, he saw not himself, but Elias, smiling with blackened eyes. Point 9. The new covenant. Elias rose. And no longer a victim. He now wore a robe, stitched from shadows. In one hand, the bell with no clapper. In the other, the book of tolls, bound in human skin. "You came for the truth," he said, voice echoing unnaturally. "Ben witnessed the pact reborn." With that, he tolled the bell. The sound broke every light in the chapel. It shattered time. Claiborne saw visions of hundreds of Eliases, all in different eras, ringing that same bell across time. The choir had always needed a bell-keeper. Now they had one again. The new history. Months passed. Claiborne never returned. Only the tape recorder survived, mailed mysteriously to Blackridge. It contained a final whisper. "Elder Hollow is no longer a place. It is a song. And it plays wherever silence lingers long enough." The last witness. It had been 7 months since Dr. Emmett Claiborne vanished in Elder Hollow. The only remaining evidence of his expedition was a broken camera, a scorched journal, and a blackened audio recorder. Authorities dismissed the event as a tragic accident during unsanctioned exploration. But Elena Morris, a young paranormal investigator and Claiborne's former student, didn't believe it. She'd been watching the signs. The bell sounds on forgotten graveyards, the strange chants in underground churches, children drawing chapels with no doors. Something was spreading, and it all began with Elias Granger. Point 2. The haunting spreads. Elena began tracking unexplained reports around the country. In Brighton, a priest heard bells ringing beneath his church floor. In Dover, a school closed after students began chanting in Latin in their sleep. In York, a baby was born with a clapper-shaped growth in its throat. All locations had one thing in common: former graveyards reburied over time. And in every case, people claimed to see a pale man in robes, walking through fog. Elias. He was no longer trapped in Elder Hollow. He had become it. 3. Returned to the origin. Elena discovered a hidden letter from Claiborne, postmarked the day before his disappearance. Inside, a Latin passage. Illud quod dormivit sub altari, surrexit sign nomini. That which slept beneath the altar rose without a name. He had included a map. It pointed not to Elder Hollow, but to a ruined cathedral deep in the Black Forest of Germany. A place known locally as Die Glockenlos Kapelle, the Bell-less Chapel. Legend said it was where the nameless bell was forged. Elena packed her things and followed the trail. Point 4. The Bell-less Chapel. She arrived at dusk. The chapel sat like a tumor among crooked trees. Ivy strangled its stone walls. No birds sang. No wind blew, and still, she heard a faint, distant tolling. But no bell was visible. Inside, time had decayed everything, except the altar. It stood pristine, as if untouched by centuries, carved into the stone. Verba non necessaria sunt. Ostend fidem tuum per silentium. Words are not needed. Show your faith through silence. Behind the altar, a trapdoor. It opened with a scream that wasn't hers. V. The chamber of the choir below the chapel was a vast chamber, circular and cold, lining the walls, hundreds of masks, wooden, bone-white, with sewn mouths and hollow eyes. Beneath them, robes, folded and waiting. In the center, a stone bell, black as night, suspended by chains over a dry well. Elias stood beside it, waiting. His eyes burned like dying coals. You came, he said calmly. The last note must be sung. Elena raised her camera, but it immediately shattered in her hands. No stories can leave here, only echoes. 6. The ritual. Elias explained the truth. The nameless bell was not made to summon God. It was built to call something older, a forgotten deity known only as the listener beneath, an entity fed by silence, memory, and grief. The church had once tried to contain it by sealing the bell and burying its name. But every time someone remembered the silence, the bell tolled again. Elias had become its mouthpiece. But not by choice. The choir chose me, but they are ready for a new conductor. He stepped back. The bell began to swing, without a clapper, yet it tolled inside her bones. Point 7. Possession. Elena tried to run, but her legs failed. The masks along the walls turned slowly to face her. Point 1 by 1, they floated from their hooks and circled her. The stone bell swung again. This time, her ears bled. Elias approached and placed a wooden mask on her face. You came to uncover the truth, but now you are the him. And with that, the ground cracked open beneath her. Flames. Screams. Laughter. 1,000 voices singing backwards. Then, silence. Point 8. The toll echoes on. Elena awoke in her flat in London, months later. Doctors said she had been in a coma. No one could explain how she was found in a graveyard over 800 miles away from Germany. She told no one what happened, but each night, at 3:17 a.m., she hears a bell. Not outside, not from memory, from within. Point 9. The final whisper. The Litany of Horror channel uploaded a mysterious video weeks later. It showed a woman in shadow reading the following words. There is no chapel. No village. No crypt. Only a bell, and those who hear it. The video ended with a low bell toll. Many thought it was fiction, until viewers began reporting nightmares of Elias standing at the end of their beds, and in the silence before waking, they all heard the same thing.